Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Fish from Historic Beverly, and today I'm going to discuss the Moses Brown and Mary Bridge Brown portraits that we have in our collection. We have a number of other items that belong to the Browns in our collection, especially Moses Brown. The piano that you see under the portraits here belonged to Mary Bridge Brown, who you can see on the left. Here are just a few of the other objects that we have in our collection. Starting from the left, we have Moses Brown's sword and pocket watch, his orderly book, a silhouette of Moses Brown, and a tea caddy that belonged to the Browns. However, today's talk will focus solely on these portraits. This portrait of Moses Brown was painted by well-known portrait painter Gilbert Stuart. Moses Brown himself was born in Waltham, Massachusetts on April 6, 1748, to Isaac and Mary Brown. Interestingly enough for us, Moses Brown's mother, Mary Brown, was born a Balch. Her grandfather was Freeborn Balch, fourth son of Benjamin Balch, who built the current Balch House. Moses Brown's father, Isaac, eventually died in 1759 when Moses was roughly 11 years old. From here, Moses Brown's uncle, older brother of Mary Brown, the prominent Reverend Thomas Balch of Denham, paid for his college. Moses Brown graduated from Harvard College with a degree in law in 1768 when he was 20 years old. He then went on to become a teacher in Framingham, Lexington, and Lincoln, Massachusetts, before moving to Beverly. Moses Brown moved to Beverly in 1772 at the age of 24. Shortly thereafter, he formed a business partnership with Israel Thorndike, a young shipping merchant who eventually was Beverly's first millionaire. That partnership thrived, so that by the mid-1770s, they were second in volume of business in Beverly, only to the partnership of John and Andrew Cabot. Moses Brown married his first wife, Elizabeth Trask, daughter of Osmond Trask of Beverly, on October 16, 1774. 3 years later, on October 9, 1777, his partner, Israel Thorndike, married Elizabeth's younger sister, Mercy Trask. Thus, they became not only partners, but also brothers-in-law. Brown and Thorndike were both ardent patriots and active participants in the revolutionary activities that had already begun to increase in Beverly and the entire Boston region by the time they were well-established business partners. Both Brown and Thorndike were active in America's military in the earliest days, though for this talk we will focus more on Brown, the older of the two and the first to take a leave of absence from their firm to join the battle for the new nation. Initially, Moses Brown was a sergeant in Captain Larkham Thorndike's company known as the First Beverly, and marched with that company on April 19, 1775 to Concord. They returned to Beverly 2.5 days later. On the top left is a memorial plaque located in the John Cabot House Memorial Hall listing the Beverly men who participated on April 19, 1775. On the bottom right of the slide is a close-up with Moses Brown's name encircled. In addition, Moses Brown is listed in American Revolution Soldiers and Sailors, volumes that we have in Historic Beverly's library, spelt with an E at the end of his name, B-R-O-W-N-E. After the battle at Lexington and Concord, more militias were being established all over the colonies. In July 1775, Continental Congress authorized Moses Brown to enlist a 42-man company of Coast Watch militia with a service term through the end of 1775. Most service terms for militias and later the Continental Army were for a year at the most. On August 7th, 1775, Moses Brown was commissioned as a captain of the militia at the age of 27. During the fall of 1775, in the aftermath of the Hannah and Nautilus battle, Brown's company constructed fortifications on Woodbury's Point and Paul's Point, both of which are today's Lynch Park and Hospital Point. These were a defense of the coast, and these actions were approved by the town selectmen at a town meeting. To learn more about the Hannah and the Nautilus battle, we do have a spotlight talk on the subject on our YouTube channel. By January 1776, Colonel John Glover of the Massachusetts Provincial Militia received recruiting orders to form the 14th Continental Regiment to serve on the Continental Army for a year. Soon thereafter, Moses Brown received a captain's commission in the new regiment. Several of the men for Brown's Coast Watch Company enlisted with him, as well as a number of other Beverly men, including William Bowles, Isaac Chapman, William Cressy, Andrew Elliott, and others. Brown's company left Beverly with the rest of the 14th Continental Regiment on July 19, 1776, when the regiment marched south to join the Continental Army around New York, ultimately serving in the battles of Long Island, White Plains, and Trenton. In our collection, we have Moses Brown's Orderly Book, as it details military orders and movements during this time frame. For more information on that, you can listen to our spotlight talk on the Moses Brown Orderly Book. Now, after leaving the Army with the rest of the 14th Regiment in December of 1776, Captain Brown returned to Beverly and resumed a life of business. His privateering and mercantile partnership with his brother-in-law, Israel Thorndike, continued very successfully. Sadly, Brown's wife, Elizabeth Trask Brown, died of pulmonary consumption in July of 1788 at the age of 34, with no children. Less than a year later, Moses remarried in April of 1789 to Mary Bridge of Salem. They had 3 children together, only one of whom appears to have survived to adulthood, who was Charles, born on May of 1793. Their other 2 children who passed were their son George, born on November 1794, who died in 96, and their next son, also named George, who was born on 1799. When a child died, it was a common practice to use the same name on the next child born, so you will often see this occur when doing research. Brown's business with Israel Thorndike was sufficiently successful that Moses was able to retire from active engagement in that business in 1800 at the age of 52. He was not entirely retired, however, since he later became president of the newly established Beverly Bank. Pictured here are pages from those who initially subscribed or invested to establish the bank. On the left is the first page, and the right page shows Moses Brown's investment. Later on, Moses Brown would go on to die at the age of 72 in June of 1820 due to a heart attack. Now I'll tell you a little bit about the artist, Gilbert Stuart, who is widely considered as one of America's foremost portraitists. Stuart is well known for his unfinished Athenaeum portrait of George Washington. The image seen here is the one used on the US $1 bill. The unfinished portrait of Washington was begun in 1796 and never finished, as apparently Martha did not like it. Stuart kept the portrait and used it to paint over 75 copies, which he sold for $100 each. He also used it as a basis for a number of other commissioned Washington paintings. Now, Gilbert Stuart was born on December 3rd, 1755, in Saunderstown, Rhode Island. In 1761, when young Gilbert was 6, his family moved to Newport, and it was there that he began to show his painting ability. Gilbert's first known painting, Dr. Hunter's Dogs, was done at the age of 14. Stuart moved to England in 1775 and eventually studied in London with the famous American painter Benjamin West. He started as a painter's assistant, painting the draperies and backgrounds in West portraits and studying him for 5 years. In 1782, he painted The Skater, which he displayed in the 1782 exhibition of the Royal Academy of Art. This painting gained him the fame and the Royal Academy of Art recognition that allowed him to move to his own studio and launch his career as a successful London portraitist. Stuart married Charlotte Coates and lived in England until 1787, when he fled to Ireland to escape debts. In 1793, Gilbert Stuart returned to the United States. He lived and worked in New York for 2 years and then moved to Philadelphia. It was there that he painted many of his George Washington portraits. In 1805, he moved to Boston, where he lived until his death at the age of 72 on July 9, 1828. He never really learned to manage his finances successfully, so at his death, he left his large family greatly in debt and unable to pay for most of his burial. Gilbert Stuart is buried in the Central Burial Ground, also known as the Boston Common Burial Ground, on Boylston Street in Boston. Stuart's family planned to move his body to the family cemetery in Newport, Rhode Island when their finances improved. However, they could not remember the exact location of his body, so they never moved it. During his career, Stuart produced portraits of over 1,000 people, including Presidents Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and also painted many of the heroes of the Revolutionary War and War of 1812. This included many prominent statesmen, as well as society men and women of the day. The date of the Moses Brown portrait that shows that it was completed by Stuart around 1816, which is Leighton Stuart's life. It was during this time that Stuart was being commissioned to produce portraits of the heroes of the Revolutionary War and prominent statesmen. Since Stuart seemed to always be in tough financial straits, he wouldn't have turned away from any paying work. Between 1810 to 1820, Stuart completed a portrait of Paul Revere that was commissioned by his son, Joseph Revere, which hung in Faneuil Hall, and he also painted a portrait of George Washington, which was commissioned by the Honorable Josiah Quincy to hang in his home. Another portrait that he completed was one of John Adams to hang in the then only 2 decades old Massachusetts State House. A complete provenance history of Historic Beverly's portrait of Moses Brown does not exist in our records. However, it does show that the portrait was gifted to Historic Beverly on October 14, 1893, by Edward Ingersoll Brown, grandson of Moses Brown. Edward Ingersoll Brown was a member of the Society of the Sons of the Revolution in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, just like his grandfather and many of the Revolutionary War heroes that Stuart was commissioned to paint. Now we come to Mary Bridge Brown's portrait by James Frothingham. Until recently, little was known of Mary Bridge Brown. All that we had was that their marriage was on record, and it indicated that she was from Salem. However, we couldn't find no birth record for her in Salem, though we do have Beverly vital record data indicating her death on February of 1842. Beyond the marriage record, nothing further was known of her other than Moses was affectionate with his wife. We have a letter of his in which he addresses her as "my love," and dated February 13th, 1795. The first line of the letter says, quote, "It is impossible for my love to describe to you the pleasure that I felt in receiving your letter. It excited the tenderest feelings of my heart towards you and our dear little ones," end quote. Recent research may have shed a little more light on Mary Bridge Brown. We searched for her on Ancestry.com and received a hit on Find a Grave under Brown, spelled with an E, which has a Mary Bridge Brown in the Mount Auburn Cemetery. That Mary Bridge Brown has the same death date and age of the Beverly vital records shown for our Mary Bridge Brown. She, too, also had a spouse named Moses Brown with the same birth and death dates as our Moses Brown. And finally, also a son named Charles Brown. As this monument shows here, in 1854, Charles Brown, son of Moses Brown and Mary Bridge Brown, had his parents' remains removed from their original burial site, presumably in Beverly, and moved to new lots in the Mount Auburn Cemetery near his. They remain there to this day, buried next to their son, who passed away 2 years later in 1856. All this information on the monument we put together with our knowledge creates a solid likelihood that this is our Mary Bridge Brown. From the information on Find a Grave, this Mary Bridge Brown has been linked to a Framingham Bridge family. If this is our Mary Bridge Brown, then the recent research using Framingham's vital records in our collection indicates her parents were Reverend Matthew Bridge IV and Anne Perkins Bridge. That she had 3 sisters and 2 brothers also identified. She was born September 7th, 1760 in Framingham, and we do not know when she was removed to Salem. However, based on our research, it is likely she was either visiting or living with her sister, Eleanor, who had married Captain Samuel Ingersoll of Salem in 1781. Beyond these basic statistics, we only have a little more on Mary Bridge Brown. We believe she played a piano, as is evident by the custom Chickering piano we have in our collection, and upon which we have another spotlight talk to which you can listen to. We found evidence on Ancestry.com that after Moses' death, she requested and was granted a survivor's pension based on her husband's military service. The record shows that she received the pension from at least March 1836 until her death in 1842 at the age of 82. Now, to wrap up, I'll give you a little bit about the artist. James Frothingham, who lived from 1786 to 1864, was the son of a maker of carriage bodies born near Boston in Charlestown, Mass. in 1786. Initially, he worked in his father's shop, where he taught himself to paint the finished coaches. He also experimented in sketching. He started to paint portraits after meeting Fabus Whitting, a younger artist based in Lancaster who is believed to have taught him the fundamentals and later introduced him to Gilbert Stuart. Frothingham began his training by painting portraits of family members, and by age 20, he had abandoned the carriage-making trade for full-time portrait work. During this early stage of his career, he visited Gilbert Stuart, who was to have a profound influence on his later development. Although unimpressed by Frothingham's first efforts, Stuart eventually revised his opinion, and Stuart became a sort of mentor, encouraging the younger artist with periodic criticism of his portraits. Stuart himself later remarked that, quote, "Except myself, there is no man in Boston can paint a better head," end quote. Frothingham became one of several artists to adopt Stuart's light tone, freely brushed manner, and he often executed copies of his mentor's portraits. He painted many prominent men of his time, including Samuel Dexter, an early American statesman serving both Congress and later presidential cabinets, and Salem's Elias Haskett Derby. Frothingham spent the last 2 decades of his life in Brooklyn, where he died in 1864. His daughter, Sarah, became a painter of miniatures and painted this portrait of her father. Now, I want to thank you all for watching this historic Beverly Spotlight Talk. If you have any questions, we implore you to please email us at research@historicbeverly.net, and be sure to find us on Facebook, or check out our website at historicbeverly.net. Most of the images used for this presentation can be found on our collection website at beverlyhistory.pastperfectonline.com or at the website seen here. Be sure to check out the rest of our channel, where we have even more spotlight talks on Moses Brown's orderly book, as well as Mary Bridge Brown's piano. Thank you for coming to the Spotlight Talk. We hope to see you next time.